Hello, Mason. This is Connie Davidson, and I want to walk you through the lesson planning procedure. You're almost there, but there are things that we've got to get resolved before you end this term. Because when you go to the next term, you're not, if you don't have lesson planning down well, it's going to be very difficult for you to progress. So I've taken the lesson plan that you offered in the lesson 6.01, and I'm going to walk through the lesson plan to see if I might be able to make things just a bit clearer to you. So this part is fine, the subject, and your written response to the goals. You talk about what the student will be able to do, and that's fine, but I think you want to think of your goals more globally. And in this particular case, we have a mathematics lesson where the students are going to work with equations, and they're going to be able to demonstrate their understanding about I guess changing equations into decimals or whatever that might be. So here you don't need to be that specific. You want to say something like, the goal of this is for students to understand the mathematical procedure for solving mathematical equations, and that they will understand how to use decimals, and that they will be able to solve these particular kinds of questions or problems. So it's a much more global statement. What you've written here in the goals are actually the measurable objectives, and they are a little different than what the student will be able to understand globally about the lesson. So you want to reshape this into a much more global statement. Then you have the concepts and the skills down here, that the lesson will teach the students to recognize mathematical equations using decimals. That's really the global piece, and that they will be able to solve for X. The skills are going to need to know, and the concepts are going to be able to understand is they're going to need to know how to add and subtract. They're going to need to know what a decimal is. They're going to need to know what equations look like. Those are the concepts and the skills. Here you don't need to write these things because it doesn't ask you about that right now. It just says in order for them to be successful doing this, what are some of the knowledge that they need to know? Down here you have the standard, and you are fine with the standard for um, the, um, for the math standard. Excuse me. But you didn't put in the English language development standard, and you have to put that in. You've already finished that module. That was module number 3. Every single lesson that you write from this point on, because you are going to be receiving a certification that says that you understand how to institute the strategies involved in English language development, and that you understand the protocols. You have to put the English language development standard here. So where are you going to find that standard? Well, you're going to go back into Edit. You're going to go into the, excuse me, not on this one. Let me get out of this one. You're going to go into Edit here for the standards. You're going to add the standards here. I can't do it on your document, so let me open up one so that you can see. Okay, these are English language development standards, and you find the English language development standards in the standards section when you go and get the California State Content Standards. They're right below it. And all you have to do is click this, and you see where it says listening, speaking, reading, writing. You're going to come back to this later, but this is the listening, speaking, reading, writing that they talk about when it says language. We're not talking about English language arts. We're talking about English language development skills. So here, let's say in listening, since you're going to be given a lesson, if this is for between 3rd and 5th graders, you click here. And hold on, let me go back one because I just realized that this isn't large enough. So let me choose the standards. Hold on. Let me get the screen just a little bit smaller. There we go. So here are the English language development standards. I click here. I'm doing listening and speaking. Here's the grade level. I decide on the strategies application. Now I have to know where are they in the English language development process. And if you don't have any kids in your class, then you pretend like you do. So let's just say this child is in the early intermediate ELD level. You click here. And then it'll say, so what is it that you're going to be using in this lesson that you are going to want to make sure that the child is going to be able to do based on listening and speaking. Since you are actually going to ask these children to understand something and to organize something, then you might want to click here. Then it will tell you that this student needs to here we go. This student needs to orally identify main points of simple conversations and stories that they read aloud, and not so much. The student needs to orally communicate basic need, not so much. The student needs to recite familiar rhymes and songs. Well, that's not it. So let's go to the other one. And this is what you do. This is how you find what you're going to be using in order to help this child develop their English language. So begin to be understood when speaking and may have some inconsistent use of standard English. Well, this one's probably the one you want, because if you're going to talk about this child learning how to do this mathematical stuff with equations and decimals, then you're going to ask the child questions and the child has to speak back to you. Or the child is going to have to speak with a partner. So the kid is also going to have to be able to answer questions, and they're going to have to be able to restate stuff. And because you're going to ask the students to provide information in detail about what they're going to do, I think that you probably find that for this child under listening and speaking, in comprehension, you are going to be addressing these three areas. So you choose those standards, and then you add them to the standards box. But you're not through. You have to still go back to this standard. You have to still open it because you only talked about listening and speaking. You have to also deal with reading and writing. When you are working with an ELD, any language you're going to develop, you have to think of these four domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking, because this is how language is used. And your lesson has to address the ways you are going to adapt this lesson so this child who is learning English can continue to improve their English and expand their English so that they can move up from whatever level they happen to be in for third grade. If they happen to be for word analysis in the early intermediate, you want to work with them, making sure they can do all of the things that are going to be shown here so that they will ultimately move to this level. That is your responsibility as a teacher in the state of California as it relates to language development. Your lesson plans have to have evidence of this in them, or I send the lesson plan back. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sending this module back, is those things are not in evidence. So you're going to want to make sure that you add those standards into this box. These standards mean all the standards. And because we have moved to Common Core in math and in social studies, in math and in English, if you happen to be at a Common Core school, you can import the Common Core standards here. If you're still at a school that's in the process of adoption, you can stick with the California State standards if you like. So now we have the grade level, and now we have the objective. This is really the objective, that you are going to be able to see that the student is able to identify and solve mathematical equations. You're going to be able to measure that. So that's what an objective is. An objective states what you are going to measure as a level of mastery. So you write it in given mathematical problems that are equations. The students will be able to convert those into decimals. The students will be able to articulate how the process they use for the conversion, and the students will be able to write the conversion onto the paper that they hand in. The other thing I want to caution you is using the word correctly. Correctly implies that there's only one way to do something, and that's just not true. There are many ways to solve math, and you happen to be showing them one way to do it. But a student may find another way. What you want to do is change correctly to accurately. Accurate means that they can get there using many paths, but if they get there and understand the process, then that's fine. If you are only defining one process and this is the only thing you want to measure, then you have to say the student will be able to add and subtract using cubes or sticks or something very specific. But you still don't want to say correct. You want to say accurate. Here, we already talked about this. Language objectives means English language development, not English language arts. So what you have to do is look at your English language arts objectives and then see what is it they're supposed to be able to do, and then see how that relates to the English language development objectives. Or you can look at the English language development objectives, knowing where a student is, and then you write down what it is that student will be able to do, because a student learning English may not be able to write this equation or organize it the way that you have, or know step by step, or repeat back step by step, or do a variety of different things. Maybe they're going to have difficulty listening to instruction. The point of that is that when you continue on in this lesson planning template, when it asks for adaptations, this is where you're going to see, okay, I got a kid who has a special need. How am I going to make this lesson accessible to that child? So you have the classroom information here, and that's fine. As you progress in the program, you will find that you're going to need a lot more detailed information here, because what this demonstrates is not just I have 33 kids, 14 boys, 21 girls, blah, blah, blah. What this indicates is that you understand who you have in the classroom. How many students are ELD? How many students are on Title I? What's the community like? How many students have behavior issues, whether they are identified through an IEP or observed by you? We have to know that you know who you're teaching. If you have a child that tends to talk out, you only have to describe this class one time, but it has to be described thoroughly. This is cursory, but it's too close to the end of the term, and I want you to get down the lesson planning process more than I need for you to provide me with class information. The considerations, these are the types of things that you are going to consider in implementing this lesson. If you say you're going to consider behavior, then I need to know what that behavior is going to be and how you are going to specifically deal with this. So you say you anticipate difficulties at first behavioral. Okay, this lesson involves individual and group work, and as a class-wide discussion as kids report the class, blah, blah, blah. There are multitude of times moving chairs. I can lead off. I don't know. What are the behaviors that are going to cause you a problem? And you don't define that. So I don't know what that means. Social development. What does that mean? You say social development raises another flag because a lesson depends on collaborating and speaking to the whole class. So what does that mean? What are the social development issues that you see exhibited in your class that you anticipate this is going to be a problem? Our class is really chatty, but that's normal for a 4th grade classroom or a 3rd grade classroom. So I know I'm going to have to do these things in order when you do the adaptation, in order to resolve this issue or anticipate this issue. You tell me stuff, but you don't describe it, so I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what the behavioral things are going to be. How is wait time going to reflect on social development and behavioral? How is grouping going to deal with your anticipated difficulties? You say you have these adaptations, but I don't see how these two things are related at all. Your written response for the adaptation details is that your wait time and grouping seem to be the two most prolific and intertwined necessary adaptations for the class. Why? Waiting for the students to quiet down? I don't get that, because if you're going to be doing grouping, you need to have things in place that already have that. This anticipated issue is understanding the learning needs of your students. And if you have behavioral problems in your classroom and they don't know how to group, then are you going to assign them roles, time them to move, do certain things in order for you to resolve this issue? Grouping usually means I'm going to group them differently so that the students will be less distracted. Grouping is not an adaptation. This is just how you are going to teach the lesson. The behavioral problem is they don't know how to move quickly. So what is it you're going to do in order to get them to move quickly? How are you adapting the lesson for grouping? This doesn't relate. You're just telling me what you're going to do and what you see, and it's probably going to lead to stuff. And wait time, how effective is that? As an educator, I do understand wait time, but I also know when students are moving into grouping, wait time can take 15 minutes, and then you have no time in order for the kids to do the lesson they need to do. So what is it that you do in order to organize the students to move? That's what you need to answer when it talks about the details. And that's what it means, details. You give me very few details. You tell me stuff, but you never detail it for me so I understand it. Incorporation of 21st century skills, collaboration and communication. Okay, I can live with that one. That's okay. I can see it in your grouping and the way you want to do the lesson. Assessment is going to be formative, and it's going to be traditional, recall, recognition, response to true and false, choice, fill in. So my assumption is that the students are going to be given some kind of handout that they're going to have to do multiple choice, recall and recognition, and formative. So now you describe the assessment. For this assessment, it has multiple levels. The students can assess their own individual work by their process of showing their work and checking their answers. But if I don't know what I did, I think that what I did was already okay. So I'm not exactly sure how that's going to help me by checking my work, and then I don't catch my error because I don't think I made an error in the first place. That I guess that's they also can help assess themselves and their classmate through collaborative learning by doing math problems in small groups. Okay, that tells me what they're going to do. The instructor assessed their work by reviewing the work individually and as a class. Well, okay. The formative feedback can be used both by the instructor and the students to recognize and respond to the students' learning during the learning. All right. Students learn by doing and need to be assessed throughout the lesson. I get all that, but you never tell me what the assessment is. That the student should be able to do X number of these problems given a handout. Given 10 problems, the student should be able to answer 8 of them correctly and show their work in detail. That's what this is asking. This is just telling me in general what assessment is, how you're going to implement assessment, but it doesn't tell me how you're going to measure mastery. You get this statement from here when you write the content objectives. If the content objective is clear, the students will be able to convert equations into decimals. Then down here, you say the students will be able to demonstrate mastery by converting given 10 problems, 8 of them into decimals and showing their work. Now, you also don't mention that they're going to do something traditional with recall, recognition, true, false, multiple choice, or fill in. That would be written here. Given a handout that has this stuff, or they're going to answer a series of questions to demonstrate recall. It's just not clear. Okay, you're going to do direct instruction, collaborative learning, pencil, paper, math text, whiteboard, multicolored pens. Are they getting a handout? Do they have their math notebook? There's not enough information here based on the way you're describing the lesson. Now, this is the part that is the most disturbing for me, in that You tell me what you're going to do, but you never show how you're going to do it. Opening of the lesson on adding and subtracting decimals will begin with the students opening their textbook and going over basic review. So the way you wrote that, I see a class where they walk into the classroom, pick out a math book, go to a page, and start reviewing their work. You're not involved in this at all because you don't ever say, I will greet the student, will ask the children to go to the math page so and so that we can review equations, or if they're doing adding and subtracting, we can review adding and subtracting. I will ask the children these questions so that I know that they understand. The questions are, I will first ask them, what is addition, what is subtraction, what are decimals, what are equations, and we will clearly review that before we move on to the rest of the lesson so that I know that they understand how to the prior knowledge necessary in order to complete this lesson. You just tell me that they're going to do this, but you don't tell me how you're going to get them there. You don't tell me what you're going to be looking for when they're there or why you did this. Adding and subtracting will be talked about how and explained how, when and why it is necessary to use each. How are you going to do that? You have to narrate this like you're writing a screenplay. Then we will introduce, we meaning you and the kids, you and the other teacher, or you will introduce. Then I will introduce decimals and explain and review when and why we add and subtract decimals. Well, how are you doing that? What are you going to do? Just say, hello, these are decimals. Let me explain what they are. Okay, did you get it? How are you going to create understanding for these kids what is a decimal? Now, whether or not, you have to understand something, Mason. It's not, I don't care if you ever implement this lesson. What I do care is I have to understand your thought process for using the strategies and activities required to implement an enriched learning environment so that your students will be engaged, that you will be prompting them to think, that you have a roadmap with certain stops in mind, and I can see that. And I'm at a loss to know what the student's intuition is. I don't know what that means. I have not seen that as a measurable outcome, so I'm not exactly sure how students' intuition will play a part in this. I think you might want to find a better word. A prediction might be a better word because that's measurable. You can't measure intuition. If the students are going to think about and brainstorm, I can get that, but you can't say intuition because I don't know what that means. And most of the educators I know wouldn't know what that means or how it gets measured. So in here, you just tell me, this is what you describe, these are the things we're going to do, but you don't give me a way to understand how you are going to implement them. The same thing here. You say in the body of the lesson, this is where the students actually learn. This is where the students actually practice. This is where the students learn. This is where you let them go and see what they know how to do. All of this stuff up here where you're teaching them what a decimal is and all that other stuff, this is where the learning is taking place. That review part was the only part that was the open. All this other stuff down here, that part goes here. The independent practice and when they're doing stuff, that's when you're walking around, but that's not where the learning is taking place. This is where you are understanding the learning that they have. This is not where they make understanding of new concepts and connections. Down here is where you were able to close the lesson with some type of assessment. You have final questions will be taken. Okay, I get that. The instructor will give an overall assessment of the strengths and weaknesses and other observations found throughout the lessons. Regarding what? What are you going to be looking for? You're so vague here. I can't find it. The students ask and give their feedback. How are you going to do this? Are you going to put a question on the board? Are you going to say, this is some things I've noticed? How did I notice some of you resolved these? How did you do it? It's just too vague. You might think I'm being hard on you, but let me explain why. Next term, you start taking teacher performance assessments. And if you were to write like this in a teacher performance assessment, you are not going to pass. You get 2 times to pass that assessment. Hopefully you'll pass it on the first one. But if you don't learn how to detail the way you write a lesson, you are not going to pass it, and you can't get your credential without passing it. It's very important because the evaluator is only going to know what you wrote. They're not going to know you. They're not going to know your circumstance. They're not going to know how you teach. They're only going to know what you write. And you have to write with clarity of your thinking and why you make these choices. And right here, I just have an overview of what's going to happen in the classroom, but I don't have any clarity of your thinking. So you're going to need to go back. You're going to need to rewrite this. I'm going to look over the other lesson plans. If I see that they're like this, I'm going to read the things in the module that do not relate to the lesson plan. And then you're going to have to resubmit this with all the lesson plans redone. So I will look forward to it soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.